Hugh.
Hugh.
So first to say that I was completely unprepared for this, which is beautiful, and typically Tisziji in that he put me on the spot in a completely unexpected way. And I feel good about it. And he invited me to share something about my story and how I came to meet him. So I'll give a little bit of background, really just as a setup for why my first experience and encounter with him was so powerful. I grew up in a Christian family. My uncle was a Jesuit, my late uncle. So Christianity was important to us, but not in a zealous way. But it was present. By middle school, however, I was already questioning that. I refused to be confirmed, despite my father telling me that I would get numerous checks for going through it. I felt something else was calling me. And it was around that time in 7th or 8th grade that I had read for the first time the Dhammapada, which is a young age, perhaps, to be introduced to that, but I was lucky that a friend of a friend got me interested. Later on, the Tao Te Ching spoke to me very deeply. And throughout high school, I kept searching. And I picked up the saxophone, mainly inspired by the music of John Coltrane, which at first I didn't connect with spirituality, but which soon became clear had to be connected. Especially because of the message that Coltrane himself was very clear about delivering through his music in his later life, which I took the most inspiration from, was moved the most by. But I always had a degree of skepticism about the idea of enlightenment, that it was possible or meaningful or scientific enough or whatever. I enrolled at New England Conservatory and started there in 2001. And one of the teachers there that very quickly caught my attention was Rakalam, Bob Moses, who I didn't know yet as Rakalam, just as Bob Moses. And he was interesting to me not only because of his extensive experience in jazz and his having played with famous performers and that sort of thing, but also because he seemed very intent on delivering a certain kind of message side by side his music, which was one that was about freedom, and freedom through music, playing free music, but not just as a style or as an aesthetic, but really as a practice. And very quickly I found out that that was coming from his teacher, Tisziji. But I was still in a state of extreme doubt, not only about the question of enlightenment, but really about myself and about, whether I could even be happy, let alone enlightened. So I wrote to Tisziji and I said, basically, show me the money. You know what I mean? Are you the real thing? And I said to him that I wanted to die. I meant that in a sad and depressed way, but also on the flip side in a very spiritual way. And the first thing he did was he sent me a copy of I Am Silence. And instantly I knew I was corresponding with someone who was coming from a very deep place. Finally, in 2002, I was invited to meet Tisziji for the first time. And nothing that I had ever read or imagined or experienced in an LSD trip or anything like that really prepared me for what I felt in his company, what I guess saw in his company. It's not something that I can easily describe, but so much doubt and uncertainty was completely vanished in that moment. I don't know how it happened. And it's not just because of what he says. It's not just because he's very humorous, and he is. And it's not just because he's so focused and always on target, always living exactly what he preaches. There's something else that's subtle and somewhat beyond thought that just seemed to enter me and enter the space. And I knew that where he was coming from was real. And everything else is like pointing at the moon, but is not the moon itself. And I mean everything else. Everything. One of the signs at that moment for me, and this was in some way kind of hearkening back to my upbringing as Christian, was that I saw a ring of light around his head. And it's not something that I really talk about or hold up as any kind of solid evidence, because, you could say it's a hallucination or whatever. It doesn't matter, actually. But in that moment, it was so clear as day to me that I was in complete awe. I was in complete awe. And it seemed like it wasn't going away. Like if I rubbed my eyes or if I blinked. Or whatever. It was just there and radiant. And I took it as a sign that something that I was experiencing was real and that I needed to see. And although I am deeply fond of and interested in the sciences, and I know all the arguments about why any kind of spiritual experience can be doubted, the reality of that moment has never left me. And every time I sit with Tisziji and laugh with him, there is a feeling of that kind of blissful release of the weight of my head, or whatever it is, of my, whether you want to call it ego or suffering or whatever terms you want to use, And that's very real to me. It's not something that I can deny. And It's consistent. That's one of the beauty dash truths of this experience and what's happening here is that Tisziji is always there, always here. Never for 1 second, not for an instant, is it anything other than absolutely present. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. Love always.
Love always.